You can see doctors from anywhere these days, essentially. And when you're working on diet and lifestyle stuff like this, that's a very viable option. You don't necessarily need to be in person with that doctor. Try and find the people that are having the results that you want to achieve and find out who they're working with and what they're doing differently around their health. These are the concepts that I talk to people about to help them take back control of their health. And that's how we ultimately make America healthy again. We each do it for ourselves at first, and then it just keeps spreading organically from there.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I am your host, Dr. V, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. And on this episode, we talk about the number one killer around the world, which is heart disease, and the world's expert in reversing heart disease and knowing how you can keep yourself happy, healthy, and in peak form so that you do not die of a heart attack. In this episode, we're going to dive through the myths around cholesterol, whether or not you should be using statins, and how you could focus your life on the choices that you can make so that you prevent heart disease from happening for yourself and for the people that you love. Now, before we get into the conversation, if you are new to this podcast, welcome in. This is a place where I have the extreme honor of interviewing the world's thought leaders in health, wellness, longevity, and human potential. And this guest is somebody who had a very similar story to me. He is a cardiothoracic surgeon, and so he treats heart disease. He does coronary bypass surgeries, much like I did arterial disease for the legs and the body as an interventional radiologist. He did that for the heart. Both of us got disease. Both of us had metabolic dysfunction, and we both reversed it. So I want you to know that reversing disease is possible, and so much of the root cause of many diseases underlying insulin resistance and metabolic problems. And on today's podcast, you're going to get access to what are the easy steps that you can take to not develop insulin resistance. What is the root cause of insulin resistance so that, again, you could live a long and healthy life, and then share that knowledge so that the people around you can also have a long and healthy life. Now, if you're just getting started with my work and you want to dive in a little bit deeper, I've got a lot of free tools and resources. Go to thrivestatestarter.com to check it out. I also have a really neat toolkit for you to get into what I call the Thrive State. That is the state of optimal health, longevity, and peak performance by going to mythrivestate.com/toolkit to receive a toolkit for you to audit your life in the 7 major areas that will allow you to live your best life. Now, on to today's guest. My guest today is a world-renowned speaker and thought leader in the heart disease space. He was actually obese his entire life. He was raised as a child who was obese, became an obese teenager, actually became a doctor being obese. Now, we all know that obesity is a risk factor for many chronic diseases, including heart disease. So he had a rude awakening. He started developing techniques, tools, choices that he made to actually reverse his obesity. On today's podcast, you will know exactly what he did to really take control of his health. And it should be empowering for you to know that if you might be suffering from any ailment, that understanding these very basic tenets on metabolic health, how to be insulin sensitive, is going to be a game changer for your longevity and performance. So much like me, he had chronic disease previously, but now has reversed it. So it is possible to make yourself healthy again. And it is possible to make America healthy again. So you're really going to enjoy this conversation. The conversation and what you're going to learn from this podcast will be life-saving and life-changing. So ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy this conversation with myself and Dr. Philip Ovadia. Dr. Philip Ovadia, welcome to the Thrive State Podcast.
Great to be here with you, Kien. Been looking forward to this since we got to meet in person a few weeks ago, and excited to chat with you and your audience.
Well, my audience is very familiar with the part of the show called the 5 to Thrive. 5 questions, rapid fire, just to kind of like loosen, break the ice a little bit before we dive in. 100 points each question, and win the 5 to Thrive. You get a healthy heart, healthy meal on me. the next time we connect. So are you ready to play the 5 to Thrive?
Let's do it.
All right. Question number 1 is, what is your favorite heart healthy meal?
That would be a big old steak.
Delicious. Question number 2, are you a morning person or a night owl?
I am more of a night owl, but as a surgeon, I am kind of forced into morning life as well.
Question number 3 is, what would be 3 words you use to describe yourself?
Let's see. We're going to go with passionate, mission driven. That's sort of a hyphenated word, and family centered. Another hyphenated word.
All right. Well, we are definitely aligned there. You're doing great so far. Well, you get the last 2 questions. Question number 4 is, what quote, book, or phrase, what idea entered your life that completely changed how you viewed the world thereafter?
So I'm going to go back to the late great football coach, Joe Paterno. And he said, you have a choice to make every day. You're either getting better or you're getting worse, but you're not going to stay the same.
Definitely gives us a little bit of agency with that quote there. Last question for you is, what is one of your major joys that you do outside of medicine?
So, I mentioned before being family centered, and my joys outside of medicine come from seeing my family thrive, and anything I can do to bring joy to the lives of my children and my wife, that's what brings me joy.
That's the alarm ringing that you have won the 5 to Thrive, which means a heart healthy steak on me the next time we connect. I am looking forward to that.
Me as well. Can't wait to get some good ribeyes together.
Ovadia, what type of last name is Ovadia?
Yeah, so Ovadia is a Hebrew name. Ovadia is one of the prophets in the Old Testament. It's actually more commonly a first name over in Israel, and you see many Rabbi Ovadias throughout the writings of the Old Testament and the scholarly Hebrew books.
Well, I'm looking forward for you sharing a lot of the wisdom here, because many people listening are wanting to know how to improve their heart health, how to become healthier, knowing that cardiovascular disease is still one of the major killers of Americans and people worldwide. We share a very similar story. You keep people off your operating room table, and I wanted to keep people off of the interventional radiology suite, where I was basically trying to open up blood vessels that were clogged. You do so by bypassing them. What was your initial impetus to enter medicine?
It's interesting that I honestly don't know the answer to that, right? And the background here is my parents will tell you that from the earliest age, when people asked me what I wanted to do, I didn't actually say I wanted to be a doctor. I said I wanted to be a surgeon, they'll tell you. And I really don't know where that came from. We don't have doctors in the family. It's not like anyone was undergoing major surgery when I was a child. The one thing I can sort of point to is my brother was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I was about 5, he was about 8. So I probably saw doctors and hospitals and what goes on. But somehow I just had this innate calling to be a surgeon. And as I went through high school and then college, undergrad, and medical school, that stuck with me. I never really wavered from it. I love the hands-on surgery. I love the technical aspects as well as the knowledge-based mental part of it that combines. And I love seeing those outcomes, right? As a heart surgeon, you know pretty quickly whether what you did worked or didn't work. And it's obviously a high stakes game. But ultimately, what I've discovered throughout my career now, and as I've integrated this other part of trying to keep people off the operating table, it really is about helping people to be their best. And I feel honored and blessed every day that I can help the people that have the advanced heart disease and they need the surgery. But I now have a deeper understanding of the disease process that we're dealing with. And as you said, heart disease, it's not a top killer, it is the top killer. Number one in the US, in the world, has been that way for the past 70 years and shows no signs of slowing down. So I recognize we need to do a better job of preventing it, keeping people off the operating table. And I've been excited over the past years now to bring that part of this into my practice.
We share a very similar story. I know you've lost over 100 pounds. About 10 years ago, in my own life, I had type 2 diabetes. I had high blood pressure. I was on several prescription medications. And I often get asked, how does you being trained at all the institutions you've been trained as, end up getting chronic disease? And certainly, I think my audience is familiar with my answer, but what was your journey like? And how do you think our conventional medical education has failed both of us?
I struggled with obesity going back to childhood. I was obese. Most of my family was obese. I would say that in some ways it kind of got normalized. I saw most of the people around me were overweight and obese, and I didn't think all that much about it. But as I went through my medical training, my education, of course, I learned the standard advice around this: eat less, move more, the food pyramid. And I made multiple attempts to lose weight and had some short term successes, would lose a bunch of weight, but it never sustained and I would gain it back and more, which I'm sure you and your audience is well familiar with. And then after I had my children, this sort of, I would say, came more to a head. I didn't get quite to the point that you did. I was only pre diabetic, but I was morbidly obese. I was at a loss because I was following the advice that I had been educated to give, and it wasn't working for me. And it wasn't working for my patients. Thankfully, I started thinking about some different things, became open, I would say, to different ideas. And then I happened to be at a meeting of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. So, a couple of thousand heart surgeons in one of the big conference halls. And there was a guest lecturer by the name of Gary Taubes. I'm sure a lot of your audience is familiar with Gary. At that time, he had just written The Case Against Sugar. And of course, prior to that, had written Good Calories, Bad Calories, and Why We Get Fat. I started listening to what Gary was saying about the types of food that we're eating being more important than how much food that we eat, and the role that hormones and insulin play. And these are things that we learned those biochemical processes in medical school, but we never really had it put together in that fashion. And I said, okay, I'll do the experiment. And I started on a low carb diet and cut out sugar and had great success, lost all the weight, was feeling better. And that prompted me to ask why. Why didn't I hear about this in school? Why aren't my colleagues talking about this? And no offense to Gary in any way, but why did I have to hear about this from a journalist and not a fellow physician or professor? That really opened my eyes to a lot of things that we get wrong in medicine. And I came to understand that the disease that I had dedicated my career to fighting, heart disease, I didn't really understand. And a lot of what we were taught about heart disease wasn't really the full story. And that has allowed me to kind of take a whole different approach. The most important part of that being that heart disease is completely preventable. I believe that 90+% of what I do as a heart surgeon shouldn't need to be done. Almost every patient that ends up on my table is a failure of the medical system. Not that person failed, but the medical system failed that person by letting them get to that point.
That's something that has been recapitulated in my own life and seeing the patients that end up needing angioplasties in their legs, etc. Can you talk a little bit about how this has failed? And we can maybe talk about certain interests that came into place that potentially prostituted out our medical education to outside interests. But let's talk a little bit about sugar. We know this also well right now, that sugar is really the driver of so much metabolic problems in our body. And certainly once you get this metabolic syndrome, it seems like depending on what system shuts down, you're going to create some disease there. And we just start labeling them as these organ system disease, which really has the foundation of insulin resistance and metabolic health problems. How did we let it go for so long? And why did we allow sugar to escape into so much of our food over the past decades?
So it's really interesting history when you dig into that. And we go back to the 1950s here in the US when heart disease was reaching epidemic proportions. And many people point to 1955 when President Eisenhower has a heart attack while in office. But it really even goes back further than that. It turns out that his predecessor, President Truman, declared war on heart disease in 1949. Everyone was talking about what's causing all this heart disease. And there were two prevailing theories at the time. It was pretty clear that it was something we were eating that was the primary driver here. And the two theories were around sugar and dietary fat or dietary cholesterol, more specifically, that people were focusing on. When you go through the medical literature from the time, you see a pretty good balance of theories around both scientific experiments being done and epidemiologic studies. And then all of a sudden, in the mid to late 1950s, cholesterol is declared the winner. It's really not based on the evidence. It was kind of a political decision. President Eisenhower has his heart attack. Among his advisory team, his physician and the scientists around them just declare that dietary cholesterol, saturated fat in the diet, is the cause of heart disease. There's a famous study that gets referred to all the time, the 7 countries study, where they purported to show direct relationship between the amount of saturated fat that got eaten in countries and their incidence of heart disease. What was hidden from that was that there were actually 22 countries looked at. If you look at all 22 countries, it's clear there's no relationship. You had countries like France, that at the time had the highest consumption of saturated fat and one of the lowest incidence of heart disease. But that kind of got left out of the study, and that starts the whole ball rolling. The American Heart Association gets funded, incidentally, largely by the food companies that were making sugar-centric foods, we'll call it, these processed foods. They do a lot of the funding of the science to try and prove that dietary fat was the problem, dietary cholesterol. And then we get this whole low fat movement. Take the fat out of the food. And in order to do that, you got to replace it with something, and you replace it with basically sugars of some sort. The processed food industry is born, and they now keep this whole thing going. That then ends up tying into the pharmaceutical industry, which largely captures the medical education system and really the healthcare system as a whole. And that's how we are where we are today. Now, I see glimpses that this story is starting to unravel. I think increasingly people are recognizing that this isn't working. And that's the basic thing that I point to. I can look back and I can say, okay, there was a decision made. We had 2 competing theories, 2 competing hypotheses. We chose one. I can understand that. But here we are 70, 80 years later. Heart disease is still the #1 killer. We've been on this low-fat dietary movement now for 40 plus years. We've had medications directed towards our blood cholesterol levels for 40 plus years. Heart disease isn't going away. It's not really getting any better. It's time for us to say, you know what? We chose the wrong hypothesis. Maybe let's look at this other one.
Yeah. One of the things I want people to maybe get a better grasp of from this conversation is this whole cholesterol myth and kind of where we are today. We certainly know of a lot of recent studies that have demonstrated improvement in markers with saturated fat. We know people on the ketogenic diet have demonstrated with some recent studies, even reversal of heart disease, but your cholesterol is going to go up. So what is the real story? We have so many people I know fearful for the longest time. Do we eat butter? Do we eat eggs because they're going to raise? What is the truth of cholesterol, and how should the average person start thinking about cholesterol and fat in their diet?
Again, we look at the 2 parts of the diet heart hypothesis as it's been come to be known. The diet heart hypothesis basically says that the dietary cholesterol and the fats that we consume determine our blood cholesterol levels. And then increased blood cholesterol levels lead to heart disease. So we can look at both parts of that, right? And help people understand this. The first thing to understand is that the dietary cholesterol that we consume plays very little role in our blood cholesterol levels. Turns out that the vast majority of the cholesterol in our bloodstream is made by our bodies, in the liver primarily. It's not the dietary cholesterol being absorbed into our bloodstream. That's a very small component of it. Now, the second part about raised cholesterol levels in the bloodstream causing heart disease is just flat out wrong at this point. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Raised blood cholesterol does not cause heart disease. That does not mean that cholesterol does not play a role in the process of heart disease. It's just that it's not driven by increased blood cholesterol levels. There's nuance beyond how much cholesterol do you have in your bloodstream, we really should be doing a better job of asking, what quality of cholesterol do you have in your bloodstream? It turns out that yes, there are good and bad types of cholesterol, or to be correct here, we should say cholesterol carrying particles in our bloodstream, but it's not as simple as most doctors understand it. It's not LDL versus HDL, HDL being good and LDL being bad. It really gets down to the types of LDL particles that you have, small LDL versus large LDL, and then the environment that those particles are in. Because before cholesterol carrying particles can get into the wall of the blood vessel and cause the plaque and the damage that they ultimately might cause, the blood vessel itself needs to be damaged. And so we need to step back and say, what is damaging the blood vessel? Because that's what really initiates this process. And that leads us back to things like sugar, insulin resistance, metabolic disease, other toxins. You can point to things like smoking. These are the initiators. We know if you want to try and really attack and eliminate a disease, you got to identify the root cause first. And cholesterol is not the root cause of heart disease. It's the inflammation and the insulin resistance that damages the blood vessels. And that's what we should be focused on.
I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you are, I just wanted to let you know, join our community. There's so many free resources and a great community of people that desire health, happiness, human potential, to have more in their life, more health, more energy. And when you have those two things together, you could create more happiness, more abundance, whether it be financial, romantic, all these things in your life. And if you're just starting out, you don't know where to go, just sign up for thrivestatestarter.com, because in there you're going to get a bundle of information that includes a longevity ebook, a longevity and performance resource guide, lecture notes that come from my keynotes at Google, at Fortune 500 companies, all the insights in that keynote in lecture slide form given to you. And then finally, breathwork. I share 3 powerful breathwork exercises to access calm, which really gives you clarity and peace during the day, to access energy if you need to wake up and really motivate yourself, and finally a breathwork routine that you could do every single morning so that you could be very intentional with how you create that day. You could find all this stuff delivered free to your inbox at thrivestatestarter.com. And our community is growing. If you want to be a part of a community of people that desire the Thrive State, that are really in Thrive State themselves, and help other people along with that, you could be a part of the community. You can get group coaching from me. We do breathwork sessions, meditation sessions, and you also get to drop in and participate in podcasts in the future. You could find more about the community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. So check out those resources. You're not going to be disappointed, and please enjoy the remainder of this podcast. It's one of those things where I look at LDL and cholesterol almost sort of like being, they're always going to be on the crime scene, but they're not the ones that are actually there. I mean, it's the insulin resistance and the metabolic problems are basically the bad guys that actually they're showing up first. And then, of course, you've got these bystanders being the LDL. So what was your process, and how do you guide people through in terms of the major lifestyle changes they should be focusing on to have control of heart health?
Yeah. So again, the root cause points us towards the right answer here. If we think insulin resistance is the root cause of heart disease, what are the primary drivers of insulin resistance? They're going to be high carbohydrate and highly processed foods. We know mechanistically, right? If the highly processed carbohydrates and other components of processed food like vegetable and seed oils, these are the things that are driving insulin resistance. So if you want to reverse insulin resistance, if you want to prevent insulin resistance from happening in the first place, you minimize or eliminate those foods. And so you end up with low carbohydrate approach. Personally, I find the carnivore type approach, a animal protein heavy approach, to be most effective and most sustainable. But I think anything that eliminates processed food is going to be a good start. The high level concepts that I talk to people about are eat whole real food, eat the things that grow in the ground and eat the things that eat the things that grow in the ground. The other sort of myth that we need to overcome goes back to that diet heart hypothesis and people thinking that the cholesterol in meat, in animal products being harmful, and it just isn't, and we don't need to fear it. So you can eat as much as you want of that. Those are the concepts that I now talk to people about. And quite frankly, they find it shocking, right, to hear a heart surgeon telling them to eat the red meat, eat the eggs, eat the things that we have been told are bad for our heart, but you gotta not eat that other stuff, the bread, the pasta, the processed food that's at the base of the food pyramid, and these low fat foods that we've been told are heart healthy and healthy for us. And they're in fact just the opposite.
Both you and I just got back from a beautiful event over in DC, a gala that is supportive of RFK Jr. and the Make America Healthy Again movement. When I posted my involvement there as chief health correspondent, I got a lot of mixed responses and emotions and reactions. Certainly, there is, I would say, distrust in maybe doctors, the medical system, the lack of transparency in the pharmaceutical industry and the government. How would you advise the common consumer, the common patient to go, how do I find the right medical care of the doctors that are now understanding the limitations and the potential misinformation they had in practicing medicine and going to a place that is more integrative and really seeing the new science that's coming out, demonstrating lifestyle and how we live our life is truly medicine?
First of all, I want to say this really shouldn't be a political issue. It's all about making America healthy again. And that event was amazing to see the energy around that concept. Quite frankly, it doesn't matter what political party is talking about this. And in reality, we have RFK who came from the Democratic Party, and we have Trump, who comes from the Republican Party, and they've come together around this concept. And we should all be able to rally around making America healthy again. One of the key things I tell people is it's great that it's being talked about at that level. It's great that there's energy around it, but don't wait for the government to do this for you. You need to take charge of your health. We as individuals all have the power within ourselves to take back control of our health. Finding a good practitioner is a significant part of that. And asking questions like, what role does insulin resistance play in my disease? What role does my diet and lifestyle play in this disease? These are the questions that people should be asking of their practitioners to find out if they're going to be the right practitioners to guide them. And if they're not, that's okay. Find a different practitioner. All too often, I find that people aren't willing or able to put the effort into finding a good practitioner. They just go by, this is who my insurance company sent me to, basically, seems to be the main determinant of how people find doctors these days. And we need to put more effort into it. And we need to use the great tools that we have available to us today. Telemedicine is a growing part of the medical system. And what telemedicine does is it liberates you from being limited to the doctors that happen to be in geographic proximity to you. You can see doctors from anywhere these days, essentially. And when you're working on diet and lifestyle stuff like this, that's a very viable option. You don't necessarily need to be in person with that doctor. Try and find the people that are having the results that you want to achieve and find out who they're working with and what they're doing differently around their health. These are the concepts that I talk to people about to help them take back control of their health. And that's how we ultimately make America healthy again. We each do it for ourselves at first, and then it just keeps spreading organically from there.
Now, I really want to reiterate that point that you have. I let people know, certainly when I was at that event, it was really non-political for me. It's a vision and dream that we got all focused on. But you mentioned it begins with our choices and how we live our life. When I was overweight and diabetic, I had Bush and Clinton as my presidents. When I reversed my chronic conditions, I had Obama and Trump as presidents. So it matters, yes, because they affect policies that affect food system, etc. And it does play a role in our health. But ultimately, the main driver of our health is being conscious about how we live life and the choices that we make that is affecting our health. To your point, it is the choices that we make, and it's ultimately all under our control. If we take a look at America as the human body, as this ecosystem made of individual cells, in our body, there is no red cell or blue cell. And for me not to have disease and for me to function at my very best, every single cell has to be healthy, has to do their part for this entire ecosystem to function and support each other. And I think that's where we stand. I feel like there are versions of autoimmune disease in our country. There's versions of cancers that are existing in our country. And so, can you talk a little bit about the role of community, about how, as it pertains to health?
Yeah, I think that's essential, right? And I think we need to be able to support each other in our drive towards health. All too often, I see people, they'll come meet with me, we'll talk about these concepts, they understand it, they want to do it, and then they get out in the world, and the people around them oftentimes are the biggest barriers to them doing it. It might be their family, it might be their friends, and they're saying things like, oh, that's ridiculous. How can all of this low fat food that has the heart healthy label, how can that be bad for you? Go ahead, you got to enjoy your life. What do you mean you're not going to eat the cookies and the cake? You can't enjoy life without that stuff. And so we do need to establish communities that we can support each other in this. And that is one of the things that I have found to be the biggest predictor of success in my patients. If they have the support, if they have a community around them, they're going to do great. Now, again, we can leverage all of the technology that we have. Within my practice, for instance, we have a community. We have an online community, and the patients can get in there and they talk to each other and they exchange ideas. You don't have the necessarily in-person local support system. You can find an online support system as well. And again, I do see things changing on this. When I started doing this 8, 10 years ago, and you would go into the restaurant and you'd say, I want my burger without the bun, get some strange looks, and oftentimes they wouldn't really know what to do. And now many of the fast food or casual restaurants have the option right on the menu to get things in a bowl or in a lettuce wrap, and they're promoting this. We just saw recently, as we're recording this, Steak and Shake, one of the big fast food companies, franchises, said they're eliminating vegetable and seed oils from their menu. This is becoming more mainstream. I wouldn't say it's mainstream yet, but it's getting there. It's becoming easier to do this. It's becoming easier to find that community, other people that are doing this as well.
This is all very, very inspiring. I can certainly speak to the energy in the room where we were at in DC. I think we're moving towards the right direction. And again, health is not a political issue. And it is very difficult to listen to some of the Senate hearings when RFK was giving his testimony. One of the things I want to leave people with, knowing that I'll be speaking with you, is what do you think are some of the important labs that people should be taking? Yes, maybe cholesterol is a number, but are you recommending people do like the NMR studies, etc.? And would you say, some people are asking about CTA, cardiac CTs. They're wondering, if your cardiac CT is good when your numbers are off, does that mean you're safe? So can you kind of maybe summarize that for someone who might be walking into a primary care office in terms of what they should be looking for and how they should be thinking about this?
Yeah, starting with the labs, again, insulin resistance is what we're trying to figure out. So there are some basic things you can be looking at. I start with, if you have that cholesterol panel, look at your HDL cholesterol and your triglycerides. And many doctors ignore that, even though it's on the panel. And then you want your triglycerides to be low and your HDL to be high. Don't just stop there. Get a fasting insulin level. I am a big fan of the advanced lipid panel, the NMR panel, to show you those particle sizes and to give you a sense of the quality of your cholesterol. Because again, if the quality of your cholesterol is good, you don't need to worry about the quantity of your cholesterol. On the other side of things, you can have low cholesterol, but you can have predominantly poor quality cholesterol. And I see this a lot in patients that are taking lipid lowering drugs. Their LDL level is low. Their doctors are happy. But you do the NMR panel and you see that the vast majority of the LDL particles are small particles. And that is still a problematic situation. And I think that's part of why statins are as ineffective as they actually end up being. Look at insulin resistance, look at inflammation, some basic things like C-reactive protein. Now, the imaging, I think, is very important as well. It still strikes me that heart disease is an area where, for some reason, we don't look at early diagnosis and prevention. Cancer, we're always looking for how can we find it earlier. We do our mammograms, we do our colonoscopy, we check our PSA levels, right? We're always trying to find it when it's at an early stage of disease. And yet around heart disease, the vast majority of heart disease is diagnosed when people have a major problem. They have a heart attack or they develop significant symptoms, and we don't do any imaging to find it earlier. And we have very good imaging to diagnose it early. The coronary artery calcium scan, simple, very low radiation, non-invasive, and inexpensive. It's like a perfect screening test, and yet it gets vastly underutilized. So I am a big fan of that one. The CT angiograms, the more detailed scans, they certainly play a role as well. And you asked about, okay, if my scan is showing no disease, am I in the clear? I would say somewhat dependent on your age. If you're young with a 0 CAC score, it's not as meaningful as being older with a 0 CAC score, but it's still better. And knowing your score is better than not knowing your score. If your score is elevated, that's more concerning at a younger age, and it should get you more focused on these root cause issues. Insulin resistance, inflammation, focus your efforts there. And that's how you're going to prevent the disease and stay off my operating table ultimately.
Yeah, we want to see you, but not as your patient. But you've got a great community, and I know you're supporting so many people with this. Can you tell people how to maybe join your community and work with you online and doing telemedicine?
Yeah, so iFixHearts is where to find me everywhere, social media, and you can go to ifixhearts.com. We have a telemedicine practice, a great team that I've assembled we see people nationwide and even internationally via telemedicine. That's where we do the work to keep people off the operating table. We also have other options of ways you can work with us, community courses. We're looking to really try and support people as many ways as possible. People can also start by checking out my book, Stay Off My Operating Table, widely available at all the usual places as well.
Beautiful. My last question to you is this. Certainly, you've done multiple different things to kind of get yourself back to a healthy place. And your answer could be very physical. It could be very abstract as well. But what has been your best medicine?
Yeah, my best medicine is really understanding why I'm doing this. And in order for people to succeed, you have to know why you want to be healthy.
Yeah.
Wanting to be healthy really isn't enough. There's got to be a deeper why. And for me, again, it comes back to family and wanting to be there for my family and also wanting to be the best physician that I can be and being able to address holistic health for people. Start with your why, have a deep understanding of why you're doing this. We talk about willpower. It's really not about willpower. It's that your why you're doing this is more important than whatever it might be that's tempting you. That's what really leads to the long-term success.
Oh, beautiful. Well, Dr. Ovadia, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for busting the myths that are out there on heart health, and I wish you the best. Looking forward to jumping on your podcast as well. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if you're finding that this content is really helping you and your family members, please consider supporting our mission and our cause of elevating health, happiness, and human potential for people all over the world. You can do so by making sure that you subscribe to this podcast, sharing it with your friends and family members, and leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. All these things are going to really help elevate the show and to give us the resources to continue to bring more content just like this to yourself as well as the people that you love. If you haven't already, you might want to consider joining our community. We actually have a community where people get to engage with me in group sessions where we do breath work, meditation, where we do challenges together, really to be able to get us access to health, happiness, human potential so that we could have longevity and performance in our life as well. You can check out our community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. And if you haven't already, pick up a copy of my book, Thrive State. It really gives you all the tools, the pillars that you need to create a blueprint to control the energetics of your life. Who are you? How you show up in the world? The choices that you consistently make create an energy in your body, and you can control this. And when you can control that, you also control the messages you give to your DNA that gives you access, again, to optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. And let me also just share a free gift to you. If you haven't already, please pick up my longevity and performance bundle where I share lecture notes, ebooks, breathwork exercises, and longevity and performance resources at thrivestatestarter.com. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. Thank you for helping us grow. Remember always, my friends, that you are your best medicine.